Good morning and welcome to our last Sunday Maritime Reads for 2021. My name is Nina Ferry Montanile and I am the reference librarian here at Oak Bluffs. Every September, the library has celebrated Maritime Month for the last 5 years in honor of Gordon Goodwin and his family and his maritime heritage here on the vineyard. They left a fund to our library friends, and instead of just investing it in books in our maritime collection, which I read to you from, we also experimented with programming. So this year we have gone kayaking, we've had scavenger hunts for kids, we did an author talk with Amelie Loyat, who is the caregiver for Vanessa the sea serpent, and we also did shellfish harvesting and story times out by the gazebo, along with many other virtual programs. I want to thank you for joining us in anything. If you missed any of the virtual programs or like the Vanessa the Sea Serpent talk, we have it up on our website, oakbluffslibrary.org. Today, I'll be reading from Whaling Captains of Color, America's First Meritocracy, and it's written by a local author, Skip Finley. Skip was not always local. He used to be in broadcasting off island, but his family has been coming here for many years. He published this book last year in 2020, and it's really, really interesting, full of well-researched details from whaling museums around New England. And also he writes in a way that it's easy to read. So you can use it for facts that are cited, or if you just want to find out a little bit more about the history of whaling in this area, either way, I think you'll find some enjoyment in this book. The beautiful, well-maintained homes decorating the village of Eggertown on Martha's Vineyard graphically illustrate that whaling was about money. The notion that whaling was fishing was a conceit of man. Industrial whaling, the purposeful killing of whales from the 1600s until the turn of the 20th century, was about oil. Skip also includes historical photographs throughout the book. This particular one from the New Bedford Whaling Museum is this Provincetown schooner William A. Grozier under sail past one of Martha's Vineyard's side-wheeled steamboats. So you certainly don't have to read the book cover to cover. You can kind of hop around and see what interests you. Martha's Vineyard, Sag Harbor on Long Island, Nantucket, New Bedford, and Provincetown formed the nexus of the industry for most of the time the business was pursued. Opportunity had taught Native Americans the value of whales and how to catch the leviathans, as white men called the largest creatures on the planet. And they passed their knowledge on to European settlers. Fortunes and lives were made and lost chasing whales until Edwin Laurentine Drake discovered shale oil in Pennsylvania in 1859. The price of the difficult to harvest whale oil plummeted. From a high of $2.55 per gallon of prized sperm oil in 1866, the price dropped down to only 12 cents per gallon in 1932. The size and complexity of the whaling enterprise was immense. More than 2,700 whale ships were built. According to the whaling scholar Judith Lund, 15,913 whaling trips were made between 1715 and 1928, with 954 of those conducted by replacement masters, experienced men who had earned the consensus of their crews to finish voyages when the original captains could not. Whaling featured an implausible cast of characters: slaves and slavers, abolitionists, Quakers, pirates, the British, killers, deserters and gamblers, gold miners, inventors and investors, cooks and crooks, and of course the whales, some with personalities of their own. That cast was accompanied by the facts and factions that conspired to kill the industry: war, weather, bad management, poor judgment, disease, obsolescence, and non-renewable resource, given the zeal of the harvest. The Europeans who came to the New World learned from Native Americans how to row out to sea and bring back whales. But instead of using the catch for food and household goods, as the Indians did, the settlers used whale oil for smokeless candles to light their homes in the 1600s. In the 1700s, they used it for street lighting. And in the 1800s, they used it for lubricating the Industrial Revolution. A $40,000 to $60,000 investment in a whale ship could be returned several times over. When whaling ended, that money was invested in textiles in southern New England. Profits from whaling and textiles developed the railroads that supported Western expansion by providing the means to move huge amounts of raw material efficiently. Finally, the money made from railroads was used to manufacture steel, the material used to construct the workhorses of the new fuel economy, oil wells. Whaling ranked among the 5 largest American industries for more than 200 years and made southern New England the Middle East of its day because whaling was about oil. Some 175,000 people went whaling. According to one estimate, most went only because they could not endure the lack of comfort, the mind-numbing boredom, and the potentially life-threatening danger at every turn. To Black men, though, whaling was far better than slavery, and as many as 20 to 30% of all the men who participated in whaling were men of color. While most Black people before the Civil War were slaves or subject to being taken into slavery, on the sea it was different, especially for whalers. They worked freely in the waters off areas where they would be enslaved if they went ashore. Not only did Black men go whaling, many were in charge of ships and earned a difficult living for themselves and their families. Nowhere, especially in the halcyon whaling years from mid-1700s to the antebellum mid-1800s, did any rank have more privilege than master, a term synonymous with captain of a whale ship. A Black whaling captain might not risk eye contact with a white man on land, but he could flog or shackle the same man at sea. The expression men of color is used here to describe those discriminated against on land because of the color of their skin, a group that included those whom today we describe as African American or Native American. Maritime historian Mary Mallory agrees with author W. Jeffrey Bolster's caution to discourage attempting to reconstruct the Black seafaring experience in entirely consistent terms. The term African American is not sufficiently descriptive of men of color because often neither attribute was true. Whale men of color included free Black men, former slaves who were Africans, Black descendants of slaves who were Americans, Native Americans with skills and little opportunity, West Indians, and Cape Verdeans fleeing drought-induced destitution in their homeland. The book is broken up into chapters about individual captains or their ships. I will read to you about Paul Cuff Sr., C-U-F-F-E. I might not be pronouncing his name correctly, and like most historical families, even in this account, they go through a number of name changes, spellings, and pronunciations. Cuff was born in 1759, and he died in 1817. So at first we'll hear his obituary or a tribute to him, and then a little bit about the history of his family in the area. Cuff must have been exceptional indeed to deserve Lamont Thomas's characterization of him as a Black, a free Black, an African, a free African, a Negro, a free Negro, a free person of color, an Indian, a Native American, a Wampanoag, Pequot Native, a Black Indian, a British American, an American. He was a Christian, a friend, a Quaker, a Puritan, God-fearing, a proselytizer, missionary, civilizer, farmer, shipbuilder, commercial trader, an entrepreneur, industrialist, a merchant, sailor, whaler, shipmaster. captain, fisherman, navigator, neighbor, a family man, a son, a father, a brother, an uncle. He was rebellious, fearless, timid, a dreamer, pragmatic, inconsistent, a protester, petitioner, a one-man civil rights movement, an advocate, sagacious, accommodating, inflexible, conciliating, a conformist, naive, pawn, tribalistic, a separatist, clannish, provincial, a role model, an embarrassment, bad, a profiteer, a capitalist, thrifty, a Yankee, a social climber, a name dropper, a schmoozer, a salesman, a diplomat, a federalist, an Anglophile, a humanitarian, a philanthropist. He was large. He was multitudes. He was Paul Cuff. So as you can see, the tribute paints a wide range of attributes. Not all of them good, but I think all of them necessary to be a shrewd businessman, especially of a man of color in the late 1700s, early 1800s. Cuff was born in 1759 on Cuttyhunk Island off the southern coast of Massachusetts. In mind, body, and spirit, he was about as far away from slavery as one could get, remarkably so because he was born before slaves were freed. Slavery did not end on Nantucket until 1773, and in the rest of Massachusetts until 1783, and throughout America until almost 50 years later. Born to a free black former slave, African father, and an Indian woman, Cuff's mixed heritage was similar to that of other black Native American whale masters, some of whom were born free thanks to these interracial marriages. Under the law, the progeny of these marriages became free blacks, but forfeited tribal benefits as a result. Scholars have typically interpreted this as a strategy aimed at Indian extinction. Kofi Slocum, Paul Cuff's father, bore the amalgamated names of an Ashanti of Akan ancestry and the slaveholders who bought him at age 10 and brought him to Newport, Rhode Island in 1728. He wound up the property of Quakers Ebenezer and Bathsheba Slocum and was sold to Ebenezer's nephew John Slocum of Dartmouth, Massachusetts. The bill of sale dated February 16, 1742, when Kofi, which meant born on Friday, was about 25, indicated he was sold for 150 pounds. Slocum, following the bent of Quakers on Nantucket and elsewhere, freed Kofi in the 1740s, and Kofi, having taken the name Slocum, married Ruth Moses, a Wampanoag whose family was from Harwich on Cape Cod. Kofi and Ruth moved from Dartmouth to Cuttyhunk Island, which had belonged to a succession of Slocums. There they pursued farming and raised a family of 10 children. Although they were familiar with the Quaker religion, they were prohibited from joining it due to their mixed race. The Yankee concepts of hard labor, honesty, frugality, prudence, order, and humility, this is how the family lived and shaped their lives. Kofi learned to read and write and keep a ledger of his activities, which included carpentry. In the 1760s, he moved the family to Chilmark on nearby Martha's Vineyard, and away from the white Slocums and closer to the native Wampanoags. There, according to his journal entries, Kofi built a shipping business, hauling supplies and people, provisioning ships and farming. Along with his children, he hired workers to meet the goals and demands, and was successful enough to acquire a 116-acre farm in Dartmouth for 650 Spanish milled dollars in 1766. On the sale documents, he changed the spelling of his name from C-U-F-F-E to C-O-F-F-E to more closely reflect his African roots. He moved his 4 sons, 6 daughters, and his wife to the mainland. Paul, the whaling captain who this is about, was only 8 years old at the time. Paul Cuff began whaling at age 13 on ships belonging to the Roch family. Whaling records were not as thorough before New Bedford took over from Nantucket as the whaling capital of the world. Thus, we know very little about Cuff's whaling career. where he gained the experience in seamanship and navigation necessary to build his merchant shipping business. In those early years, Cuff sailed with experienced whalers on trips to the Gulf of Mexico and West Indies. Several sources report Cuff was on board the Charming Polly on March 4th, 1776, when it was captured by the British. Brock Cordero lists the ship as a whaler, but does not specifically name it. When Paul's father, Kofi, died in 1772, he left Paul and David the 116-acre Cuttyhunk estate, as his brother Jonathan had left for Chilmark on Martha's Vineyard. The family attempted to farm the barren land on Cuttyhunk. After his early whaling years, Paul went to Westport, where the family had settled, and he and David began a mercantile trade with Nantucket and other East Coast ports to help support the family. The venture was profitable, and Paul had learned from his Quaker neighbors to save a portion of all the money he earned. Thanks to his thrift, he was able to invest in his first ship, the Traveler. In 1784, when he was only 25 years old, 1 year earlier, on February 25th, 1783, Cuff had married widow Alice Abel Pequit, a Wampanoag from Harwich on Cape Cod. So this short chapter goes on to talk about Paul, his family, and their whaling businesses. It's clear that they were successful landowners and ship merchants, even as men of color or mixed race. So next time you're at the library, please check out Skip Finley's Whaling Captains of Color. And I wanted to thank you so much for joining us during this Maritime Month for September 2021. I hope you have a lovely fall and come into the library. We're open Tuesday through Saturday. Our website resources are available 24/7. Come see what we're up to. Thanks so much for listening.